Good morning, good evening, and welcome to all of you here, whether in the UK or part of our massive audience around the world. Just goes to prove that innovation knows no boundaries. Well, data, it's the new oil, isn't it? Well, we hear that a lot. Maybe it's true, but have you seen what oil looks like when it comes out of the ground? Black, mucky stuff. And sadly, the data being shared in the insurance world is still the digital equivalent of that goo. Dirty, messy, and often it needs a lot of refinement before anyone is going to get any sense out of it. So, what was the motivation behind Nicola's move to leave her day job as an underwriter? She wasn't a born-to-win entrepreneur, but this is another story of everyday folk working a job that got fed up, not having the tools to get their work done. So in Nicola's case, she decided to build a company to do it. Now, this is going beyond the time wasted formatting data by hand to provide a tool that allows companies to do that, particularly for insurers. And it's another in our series talking to accidental entrepreneurs. And finally, if you still haven't discovered InsTech or what we're up to, and if you're wondering why Robin and I spend our lives talking to fascinating people like Nicola, as well as the insurers buying this technology, and you're thinking maybe we could help you, well, maybe we can. Check out what we're up to at instech.co, come along to an event, or drop us a line, hello@instech.co, or even track us down on LinkedIn. Let's see if we're right for each other. Okay, now back to Nicola. Nicola, really looking forward to talking to you. I've got to be careful because I have this habit of saying this is my favorite kind of podcast, but I really do enjoy talking to people that have worked in jobs, had a problem, and then gone off and built a business. So thank you for joining us because I know you've got a lot going on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
And we're recording this at the tail end of August. Judging by the streets of London, the rest of the world seems to be away on holiday, but do entrepreneurs take holidays or have you been working through August?
We have very much been working through August. I think I've got it ingrained in me from having worked in the insurance industry that, oh, great, it's August, it's going to be a bit quieter. And that's really not the case with the startups. It's very, very busy.
Yeah, and you don't even get Christmas off either. I guess it sort of picks up then as well.
No.
Well, I hope you get some time off, but just a little bit of a view to Scrub, and then we're going to learn a little bit more about you. So you were founded back in 2020. You're based in London. And you're providing insurance companies with your platform to help automate repetitive data cleaning tasks. Your clients can integrate with the platform to ingest data into catastrophe models, pricing platforms, binder management systems. Nicola, you're co-founder, you're CEO, and you were formerly an underwriter, as I mentioned. Have I missed anything really important in there before we go on?
No, I think that sums it up.
So we had you on stage recently at one of our live events talking to Jeremy Hyams, and rather than repeat the question he asked, which is about what problem you're solving, I'm just going to play it and then we're just going to pick it up from there. So this is what happened when Jeremy asked you the question.
Why don't we start, Nicola, with the problem you're trying to solve in the industry or any?
Yeah, definitely. I think it sums up to say the problem we're trying to solve or the problem we're solving is how costly and inefficient data cleaning is and data preparation is in the insurance industry. It's estimated that $3 to $5 billion is spent every year on data preparation and data cleaning in insurance. And it's currently an incredibly manual process. So it's done by in-house teams, huge in-house teams who sit there and manually clean up the spreadsheet data, or it's outsourced. And the consequence of it being manual and done by people is that it's slow, it's very costly, and it's also prone to human error.
So what happened next? So you had this problem and then you decided you actually needed to go and fix it.
As I said in that on-stage interview, I had a lot of hands-on experience myself with cleaning data whilst I was in my previous job. So whilst I was training up to be an underwriter, and 2019 sort of time, I started having conversations with one of my very good friends in London, Andrew, who's one of my co-founders, and he was currently working for a very big consultancy and using natural language processing solutions in big law firms. So he was applying these big NLP solutions in the real world. And I showed him just on my screen, this is what I'm doing day to day. And he said, that's mad. And the tech is now there that we could actually try and automate it. So that's really where the whole story started.
I didn't know that. So lawyers looking at insurance and saying we can make life more efficient for you. And I have this sort of theory about entrepreneurs. Some people are born to be entrepreneurs and they've got this hunger to go and look for businesses. Others I term accidental entrepreneur. How would you sort of classify yourself in that?
100% accidental. I still don't even really, I'd never referred to myself as an entrepreneur, and I certainly never intended to be that from growing up, going through uni, even when I first started out in the insurance industry. It really did come about because there still is this huge problem in the market where everybody is sitting there manually cleaning data. And I remember in my old job having lots of conversations with lots of my network in the market saying, like, you're doing this at your insurance company as well, right? This is happening at your insurance company as well. Okay. And then having that conversation with Andrew, we just thought, God, there's a huge gap. We really could do something about it. And having experienced that pain myself of having to sit there and manually clean it, I thought, God, wouldn't it be great if people don't have to do that?
And you said in there you don't consider yourself an entrepreneur. Why not?
Maybe it's not I don't consider myself one. I wouldn't refer to myself as one. And again, I think it's because I never set out with the intention of becoming that. Scrub is just born out of, for me, it's just born out of passion for solving a problem. And I do sometimes have conversations with people now where they approach me and they work in a certain industry and they say, I want to become an entrepreneur. And I think it's really important. And obviously there's lots of different ways where you can, in inverted commas, become an entrepreneur. But I do think it's really important to find a problem and solve it. And that is a very, very good route to go down to becoming an entrepreneur, I think.
You know, it's exactly what Marcus Rue, who's the co-founder of Guidewire, said. His podcast will have gone out by the time we've recorded this, 25th of August. But he's got some really interesting observations about what it takes to be an entrepreneur, including, and he's very frank about this, is sort of arrogance to believe that nobody else can solve that problem. Just getting back a step, how did you get back into insurance originally? Because that's also not always a natural career choice when you're at university or getting guidance at school as to what career to go into.
Well, to some extent, it's a classic story because my dad's in insurance or was in insurance. So he got me a few work experience placements at broking houses and syndicates all the way through school and whilst I was at uni as well. And then whilst I was at uni, I did law. And in my final year, I did insurance law, which I thought was so interesting. And after uni, I did a couple of insurance placements and then a couple of law placements. And the insurance market just grabbed me. I thought it was brilliant.
No, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, I know quite a few people, one of them actually my daughter, who would never have considered insurance, but once they started getting visibility into it, it is an incredible network of people, particularly here in London, both geographically very close, but really supportive. But I want to come back to this point about underwriting, because underwriting is a really good career, and that is back to this point about entrepreneurship. I mean, you must have been either really, really frustrated with this data issue or saw a massive opportunity, because it is a big shift to go and move from a paid salary to actually start up your own business with all the risks.
Yeah, it was a very, very big leap. And I definitely felt that it was a very big leap at the time, essentially just starting a company from scratch. So I was very fortunate to work for a fantastic syndicate. I worked for a brilliant underwriting team. I absolutely loved my job. I really loved how much sort of contractual law there was as part of underwriting as well. So I found that really interesting. And I vividly remember handing my notice in at my old company and one of the management team turning around to me and saying, oh, this is really exciting. Okay, so who's funding your new startup? And I said, well, we haven't got any funding yet. And at that point, I was thinking, what am I doing? So it was a very, very big, scary leap. But I guess I always knew that if it all went terribly, I could go back into my underwriting career. And so yes, to answer your question directly, it was a case of I just thought, this is such a big problem. No one's doing anything about it. I think someone should. So, and why not us?
Yeah, and actually that point about building a business without funding, I mean, I think the Europeans, and there's some really good examples in the UK of companies who've done that, really forces you to think hard about where your revenue comes from. And then to a certain extent, when you get to the point that you've got revenue, even making profit, you can have much more attractive terms. Have you got any investors now since you started the company?
Yeah, so we've done 2 funding rounds. We did a very small sort of pre-seed round back in 2021, which was a bit of a friends and family round, just so we could all take salaries for a start. And then last year we closed a seed round, which was a 100% angel round. So yes, we've got a lot of very experienced individuals behind us as investors, yeah. Yeah,
no, I think that's also another fantastic characteristic of this market. You see people that have grown their careers and kind of know what good looks like and then reinvest it back into the business. And that's so helpful as well. And then I just want to come back, talk about this data. So people who work in the London market and work in the areas of specialty insurance don't need to be told why that the data is messy. But why do you think it is that the market hasn't figured out how to come up with standards and consistency. And because I saw this problem 20 years ago, and I thought then that was going to be solved in a couple of years, but it hasn't. Why is it so bad?
Oh, I think there's a lot you could unpack there, isn't there? I mean, the problem exists at the moment because people use Excel as the means of transferring data and sending it to each other. And you can type whatever you want in Excel. It's the formula and the formats and the varieties of data are infinite. And that's why the data is so messy in the first place. And then that's just used as how data is sent to the broker and then to the underwriter. I think why has there been no sort of standard introduced is a very interesting question. I'd also be very interested to hear your thoughts on it. I think the length and the extent of the distribution chain in insurance certainly has a lot to do with it, because what you're asking in order to reduce the cost is for one party to agree to adhere to that standard and then pass that down the chain. And I think nobody is prepared for that additional friction and that additional cost to fall solely on them. I think that's one of the big reasons it hasn't happened.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, on that point about cost, we did one of our events in New York this year, and there was an underwriter from Zurich, and she was saying, yeah, all this sort of standardized formatted data is great, but we're not going to pay to do that. And I think that is a barrier, because there is usually a cost involved. And then, thank you for asking me a question. I love to get asked questions on the podcast. So you would have seen this as well, because I know you were using RMS in the past, albeit I think you weren't looking at treaty reinsurance. But on the treaty reinsurance side, where people started using catastrophe models 30 years ago, what happened there is the brokers were running the models, preparing the analysis for their clients. They were then sending those submissions to the reinsurers. And that was all in a standard. I mean, it was a sort of standard by default. It was never intended to be a standard, but you ended up with two standards for what was then the RMS, now Moody's models, and AR, now Verisk. And so what happened there, and I think it's a good lesson here, is that if the data was being used, or there's motivation right to your point about that whole distribution chain, if it's being processed early and there's a benefit for someone to clean the data up, then it tends to stay in those formats. But if it's easier, and this is what tends to be happening, for a broker to send a quote into London with an email with an attachment saying, hey, can you quote on this? It's not going to happen. And in fact, a lot of companies now that have given up on trying to impose standards and are building tools to be able to extract data from emails. And maybe that's just the right answer. I guess that's a version of why Scrub AI exists.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we'd expect the spreadsheet or the SAV to be attached to the email. So that is essentially where we could be plugged in, is to extract the data from the SAV. And also, just to touch on your treaty point, it's so interesting because we are still talking to some very large reinsurers at the moment. And yes, they receive the sort of EDM out the back of RMS, or the seed out of the back of AIR, which has the client's entire portfolio already standardized. But that's only when that data goes into the CAT model in the first place. Where you've got casualty business or financial lines, and the reinsurers are being asked to quote on those sorts of books of business that don't go into CAT models, they're still receiving messy bordereau. And so we are talking to reinsurers about that at the moment.
Now, we have an audience that doesn't always know all the terminology from insurance. So I'll take CAT, you can take bordereau. So CAT, of course, is catastrophe, just as a shorthand for anything we talk about CAT, we mean catastrophe. Bordereau, I'm sure you can give a much better description of what a bordereau is than I can. So over to you on that one.
A bordereau is essentially a spreadsheet with a large number of locations or insureds on it. So it tends to be a high volume. It's a spreadsheet with lots of rows on it, essentially.
And usually that's passed between the insurance and their agent, broker, cover holder, typically once a month. So some people are starting to do it more dynamically, but that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is it's done sort of irregularly and has to be loaded up into something. So spreadsheets tend to get used.
It's certainly one of the many problems, yes.
And you touched on this a bit, but where is the biggest need for this in terms of cleaning up the data, and therefore by implication, what lines of business are you providing analytics for?
So property is one of the largest classes in Lloyds, in the insurance market in general. So I was a property underwriter, so I have a lot of experience with the property, cleaning up the property data. So we started focusing on property data, worldwide property data. We handle international and US data very well. We also therefore handle political violence data because it tends to be a subset of the property data, and we can also handle cargo and species. So yes, I think anything which has a static address is where we've started.
So species, sorry to pick you up on that. I never actually looked up the definition of this. It tends to be fine art and species. So species tends to be goods that have got value that may cover my bases here, that may or may not be fine art. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, so it can be things like bullion and cash in transit and things like that. So exactly, high value goods.
And then just whilst we're sort of talking about insurance talk and Lloyds, for those people that aren't familiar with what is often referred to as the open market, you're also referring it to as property as distinct from reinsurance or what a US insurer might think of. Can you just give a really quick overview as to the types of business that are coming into London, are often characterized as open market, which is a subset of specialty insurance?
Yes, so I would normally give the example of something like take Goldman Sachs. They have a huge number of locations worldwide, offices, etc., and they need to buy insurance on their entire portfolio of offices to cover them in the event of anything happening, fire, quake, etc., windstorm. So they can be global placements, for example, Goldman Sachs, and you will receive every single location that they own and be asked to quote a price for those locations.
And so in your example, they would, if I understand this correctly, Goldman Sachs might go to one of the big global insurers, but they might come into London for parts of that program, or would you maybe Goldman Sachs go entirely to like your former employees for that coverage?
Yes. So I think that's the beauty of the Lloyds market, is that you do tend to find that large placements like that can be cut up into layers and lines, and people can take small sections of a very large risk. And as a result, as an insurance company or a syndicate, you can then have lots and lots of eggs in lots of different baskets. So you don't have a particularly big exposure with any one of these very large global placements or insureds, i.e. Goldman Sachs.
Great. Well, thanks, Nicola. That's why we have our chartered insurance continual professional development qualification, because this is as educational as it is much about learning about you. So, and by the way, I don't know if you're still collecting your CII points, but you can go and listen to your own podcast and you can get 30 minutes worth of accreditation by listening to a bit of me, I guess, as you as well. No, thanks for that. And then, so to talk a little bit from a practical point of view about how this works, and maybe even give some examples of the companies you're working with, if you like, so that people can in their mind, they can visualize to the extent you can do that, how Scrub AI kind of fits into their workflow.
Yes, certainly. So what we have at Scrub is a platform which we give to our users. And as a user, you would then take your spreadsheet, so SOB or bordo, you take your spreadsheet and you would drag and drop it into the platform, or we have API connectivity. So you might have an existing internal database or platform, and you could push a button and say, I want to clean this up with Scrub. And you will then be taken to our platform. You click 2 buttons, and then you are taken to clean data on the screen in front of you. And you can choose what output format you would like to clean that data to. So it might be RMS, AIR, SQL Impact, OED, or we can also build custom output formats for internal pricing platforms where the data will also be pushed into. So then we validate the data for you. You can choose to enhance it if you'd like to, and then you can push that clean data into an internal database, or you can download it into an Excel. It's completely up to you.
And what's your view on the future of third-party platforms as a way when you go to market? So you've got the APIs in there, people can do this independently. We're seeing, I'm sure you are, a lot of organizations now that are starting to integrate data and third-party analytics. Is that a channel that you think is going to be quite important for you in the future, or you still prefer to go this alone with your clients?
No, we've always had the approach that we have focused on a real niche, and we've built some incredibly complex and intelligent tech to solve the problem. So if somebody else has spent time doing the same thing in an area that they're an expert in, then let's partner with them and use what they've done. So we do have a tab in our platform as part of the cleaning process where you can call we can integrate it for you, but you can already call quite a few third-party APIs, for example, a geocoder, if you want to then geocode all your data. So no, we very much have the approach that the best thing to do is partner with the people who are experts in what they do.
Yeah, I think it makes so much sense. And I just back on your clients for a moment, I see on the website, you've got Aegis, Beazley, Cincinnati, you've got your former employer, ARC, it must be a good sign. So congratulations, because I know many of those people there and they've got very high standards of what they expect. Can you give a sense of what the total size is for your client base or any other names you can mention?
Yeah, so it's a real interesting one because we, in our contracts, we do say we'd love to use logos and names on the website and things like that. And unfortunately, we do find with a lot of insurance companies that they are not okay with it. So as a startup, it's something that is interesting and we have to deal with. So yes, we're working with quite a few other very large syndicates in the market who we can't name, but who have been fantastic to work with, I would say.
So I've got a tip for you on this one. So Send, who you might know, underwriting platform, what their first client was Aviva, and Aviva for a long time never let them give their name. And I was interviewing Glyn Austin Brown from PwC, and he said, oh, we really liked supporting Send with their integration with Aviva. So the trick is, if you find somebody else that knows that you're working with your client, then you're not breaking any rules, but you get them to ask that question and you can then sort of smile and deny it or not. But I do think it's really weird. These insurance companies, not to be too critical because they're your clients, and I think it's often the legal team on this, no disrespect to lawyers given your background, but I do think it's a bit disappointing sometimes that these companies aren't more willing to support who they're working with, because it's in everyone's interest to support early stage companies. So I'm thrilled to see the people that have already supported you, and congratulations to them. And if you need any help with people nudging them to give you a logo on your website, then please see if we can help.
Thank you, Matthew. I might hold you to that.
And then I want to come back to AI, talking about rigor and authenticity. I mean, crikey, is there a company today that doesn't say they're using AI? You've got it in the name. Can you talk a little bit about what it is you're doing with AI? And when I hear the word AI, artificial intelligence, and I think some of us forget that with all the recent focus around generative AI, which of course is text-based, we sort of forget that there's also artificial intelligence that relates to machine learning and is much more numerically based rather than generative AI. So long preamble to that. But yeah, if you can talk a little bit about what you mean by AI and why do you feel you can call yourselves Scrub.ai?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a question we're certainly getting asked more and more at the moment. And firstly, yes, we really do use AI and machine learning, and we use an awful lot of it. So to start from the beginning, Andrew, as I said, he's the CTO, one of my co-founders. He did the masters in AI and machine learning and NLP it was at UCL, I think 8 years ago, before any of this was really sexy. And he brought along one of the professors at UCL as well to be an advisor to Scrub. And since then, we've built and trained 50 bespoke NLP models to be able to ingest and understand spreadsheet data in the same way that a human can, and to be able to clean it up and standardize it, and crucially ensure that every piece of information is in the correct column. So that's really where we started from. So we've been using sort of language models for 4 years. And now everybody's asking us the question because generative AI is incredible and has really just exploded in the last 18 months. I think the question of generative AI in the market, I think you could have an entire webinar on it. I think it's a very grey area that the market hasn't quite got to the bottom of at the moment. When's it acceptable for it to be used? And as a company, we have used it to the extent that we can to validate some of our existing outputs, but we've been really cautious with it because clients are not okay with you sending their data to these huge public models.
You mentioned NLP, so natural language processing, for those that like their acronyms spelt out. But the other thing, this will be interesting for you, Nicola, and I think everybody else listening. We're just testing out a tool on our website where when someone's listened to this, if they think that was a really interesting point that Matthew and Nicola talked about around, for example, what types of data you look at, you can now go into our website, bottom right, find the question mark, and go, what does Scrub AI do with different coverage types? And it will actually extract our conversation and summarize the answer. It's really powerful. And that's it's quite what I call gentle use of generative AI, in the sense it's not with consumers, it's not regulated, very different clearly on some of the other use cases. But just to let you know that you are now part of a I wouldn't want to call it an experiment because that sounds a bit dangerous, but you are part of a generative AI experience with what you're saying now. So you can test it out after we go live with this and see how we get on. But it's actually working really well so far. I'm really pleased with that.
I will test it out.
And so just going back to the business. So you mentioned, Andrew, you're one of your co-founders. You had the analytical background. We talked a bit about your motivation for building a business. There's a whole other, again, or podcast we could do on how do you find your founders and then actually how do you stay together. So I guess thinking about other people that might be looking at starting a business or those already running a business, what would be your recommendations and tips for how do you build your founding team? And frankly, then how do you keep your founding team?
It's a very good question. I can only speak from my own personal experience. So I personally think it's very good to build a company with people that you know, because you already know whether or not you get along. You know maybe why you don't get along sometimes. You're already relatively familiar with them. And that was certainly true for me of Andrew. Like, he's been with my friends in London for 8 or 9 years. Now, Alex is our third co-founder, and he really was the missing piece. So Andrew is an AI genius. I have the insurance expertise. And Alex is a CEO. He's our third co-founder, and he built the entire tech stack other than the machine learning and the AI. And so I didn't know him before we started Scrub. Him and Andrew tried themselves a couple of times, but never really found anything that they could really get their teeth into. So those two knew each other very, very well. And I think, to talk to your point about how you stay together as a co-founding team, I think the key is communication, something that we've all got much better at in the last 4 years, and just to be open and really just enjoy it.
And just to keep on that thread for a bit, because I think there's a really interesting theme here. How do you deal with disagreement? Because clearly, and you'd hope you're not always going to agree on the same thing. So what happens when you've got a different view on your founders, and how do you sort of surface that without it all getting sort of messy?
It's a really good question. We actually got asked that by one of the VCs that we were chatting to a few years ago. But I think what is important is to understand the personalities of your other co-founders and understand your own tendencies. So some of us within the co-founding team are perfectionists. Some of us would rather just take the quickest route to something being done and being incredibly successful very quickly. And so we on that scale. And as a result, I think we all have strengths, as you said, are important depending on the situation, depending on the conversation. So we all listen to each other's point of views. And we said from the outset, right from the start, that we operate as a co-founding team, the three of us. We have a very flat structure in the company. And if we'll do things on the basis of a vote. So the three of us, if two of us think we should do something, then the other person, even if they disagree, you go along with it, because if the other two think it's a good idea, it probably is a good idea, even if you're not 100% seeing it right at that moment in time.
Great reason for having three founders. And Robin, I hope you're listening to this, because that's an interesting one for Robin and I. We only got two of us. But Nick, I'm just going to recommend a book, which Dickie Whitaker, who I think you know, who runs Oasis, recommended to me. It's really interesting on this point. It's got a slightly different title, but I'll explain why in a minute. It's called How Minds Change, The New Science of Belief, Opinion and Persuasion by David McGraney. I'll put a link in the episode notes. But that's a really fascinating book, because it's much your point earlier on about understanding how people and how you yourself think and are different and make decisions. It's a fascinating book about how some really fundamental views have changed in politics, in sort of personal life and things. And it's been really helpful for me about understanding my own style, and often actually how you want to change your own opinion. I think you're absolutely right there. And that sort of self-awareness is a really important part of surviving as a founding team. Nicola, I've asked you a lot of questions. You've asked me one question. Thank you. Is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about? And I'm sure also one of those opportunities that also comes with a challenge, which is, in my experience, when you build products, your clients always are going to ask you for the next thing, and you've got to manage between people wanting more and trying to keep on top of the core business, but actually also not neglecting the thing that could be the next big offering. So, well, it's good to hear, because I know claims bordereaux are actually often as bad as or even worse than exposure management bordereaux. So I'm sure there's a big opportunity out there as well. And then, Nicola, you said you hadn't taken any holiday yet, but hopefully you do take some time off. So what do you do to relax when you're not running the business?
Yes, I do take some time off. And in 4 years, I have learned that it is important to keep some semblance of a work-life balance. So I do have a couple of holidays coming up. But in terms of what I do to relax, startup life can be very chaotic. I'm really into my yoga. I find it's a very calm space for me to just level and rebalance my mind. So yeah, yoga is something I really enjoy.
And then finally, on the basis that I would think a podcast is successful if people take away at least one thing and remember that about it, what would you like to leave people with as the thing that you think is most important to remember about either you or Scrub.ai or anything else?
I think it's our reason for this company being in existence, which is that it's 2024. People should not be sat in front of a computer copying and pasting, manually cleaning data. And you really don't have to be anymore. The AI is there to solve it.
As I said, 20 years ago, I thought this problem was 2 years from being solved. Hopefully it's not going to take another 20 years to solve it. But definitely what you're doing is really important. And actually that does lead me to one final question, which is for people that are making a decision around what they or who they want to work with when they look at data cleansing, because there are choices out there, includes actually employing people yourselves to do it. What would you say they should really think about and get right when they're just defining the criteria for who they choose to work with or what they do?
I think it's important to work with a solution or a company that's going to be able to target lots of different problems that you have within the company. So, for example, a solution that can handle lots of classes of business, including delegated, and that can also handle both international and US locations with the same level of accuracy and speed. And one thing we've learned from working with our clients for the last few years is that everybody cleans data differently. So one thing that we do ensure with the platform is that there's that flexibility, so you can overlay your own cleaning rules on top of the output to ensure that it's a bespoke output that you're very happy with.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it also reminds me that we're starting to see a really strong theme coming through in this area of what we're thinking of and referring to as risk operations. So, InsurTech exists. It's a little bit generic now. What I'd say you're doing is in this subcategory, also it's still very significant, of risk operations, which is really helping create efficiency, reduce costs. And ultimately, the great thing about what you're doing, everybody wins. There are no losers in this. Everybody saves money out of it and benefits. And it's just, as I said at the beginning, it's just so fantastic to see people that have had a problem and really know how to solve it. So Nicola, thank you very much for today. And also, we really appreciate your support for InsTech. If you want to say a final few words about why you've done that, because it's particularly appreciated for an early stage company where, as we well know, every pound or dollar you spend is you've got to think about it really carefully. But if you're able to give us a reason why you're working with us, that would be fantastic as well.
Yeah, definitely. So how long have we been members for? I think maybe only a couple of months. We've attended quite a few of your events, one of which I was on the panel for. And I think the events themselves are just fantastic. The attendance is brilliant. And we always have some really, really interesting conversations with potential clients afterwards and just others, insurtechs in the industry. So I think that community is something that is really, really valuable and which we're really enjoying coming to the events as well. So, yeah.
What about the US? Because we've got our 2 events next year. Can we tempt you over to New York to join us on stage then as well?
Yes, quite possibly. It's definitely something that's on our radar, the US for next year. We dipped our toe into our first US event this year, and it's definitely something we'll be thinking about next year. So yes, by all means, I think we'll be very open to that.
Well, thank you. Watch this space. I think they've got a lot to learn from the Europeans when it comes to working with messy data. But Nicola, I know you've got a lot going on, so I'll let you get back to your running the business. But again, thank you very much both for today and for your support.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me.
Well, you've made it this far, so I'm guessing you enjoyed that as much as I did. Oh, and whilst you're still here, a small favour from me. If you're enjoying the podcast, then please do share your love with others that you think may enjoy it too, or give us a mention on LinkedIn. And tell us what you like or what you don't like. There are lots of other podcasts out there these days. Some are good, some less so. But we're also open to new ideas to keep us there in the most popular listening choices for decision makers and shakers in the world of insurance and innovation. Well, that's it. The sun is shining outside. I'm done.